This happened to me a few weeks ago, and I'm still receiving treatment at a psychiatric clinic. I don't know why this horrible incident happened, or whether it was my fault or just bad luck. I hope the people who hear this story can help me find an answer. I remember the day clearly. It was a weekend afternoon, and I was lying on the sofa watching TV, enjoying my leisure time. But then the doorbell suddenly rang, though I wasn't expecting anyone. I jumped up in surprise because there were hardly any people who would visit my house without telling me first. I went to the door and asked who it was, and surprisingly, I heard a friendly voice answer. "Hey, it's Shane, your friend?" I paused for a moment. Did I have a friend named Shane? I couldn't remember, but he kept talking. "We were in the same class in elementary school." I finally opened the door and looked at his face. I didn't really recognize him, but I thought that because so much time had passed, he looked different now than he did back then. Then, he pointed to his temple with his finger. There was a very big and ugly scar there. He said, "Don't you remember me? When we were in elementary school, you stabbed me here with a pen. It really hurt. But you didn't even apologize to me. You were so bad, right?" I was startled for a moment, as if I had been hit on the back of the head. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because of guilt, or because I was so shocked. A previously lost memory came back to me. I said with a trembling voice and a slight laugh,
"But you only bled a little back then. Why is there such a big scar? It couldn't have been from that, right?"
He took a pen out of his pocket. It looked old and rusty. I realized that it might even be the pen I had stabbed him with back then. He looked at the pen for a moment and then wiped his tears. Then he said, "You don't know how much it hurt back then. I tried not to forget that pain because I have to get revenge on you. I was afraid that if I forgot that pain, I would lose my desire to get revenge on you. So whenever I couldn't remember the pain well, I stabbed my temple so that I could feel it again. And now there's a big scar." While staring into my eyes, he stabbed his temple with the pen. He screamed out in excruciating pain while clenching his jaw. Then he held the bloody pen up to my face and said, "It's always the same pain, but I never get used to it. It's always painful. Well, it's your turn to feel it now. I've stabbed my temple 180 times in 15 years. You have to be stabbed 180 times too." His eyes were filled with rage and madness. He held the pen high and stared at my temple, as though he was aiming the pen. I tried to close the door quickly, but he came close to me and grabbed my arm. I grabbed his hand and pulled it off of me and pushed him away. But he pulled me down, and we rolled on the floor and fought. Luckily, I got on top of him and punched him in the temple. He screamed in pain and writhed. I held him down and shouted for help loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The neighbors called the police, thankfully, but Shane continued to yell at me. "You better settle your debt quickly! The more time passes, the more times you'll have to get stabbed! This debt will never go away! The interest will keep accumulating!" The police arrived shortly after and arrested him. And after that day, I hastily moved to another city. However, I still live every day in fear. Fear that he might show up at my door once again. Sometimes I think about attempting to contact him and asking for forgiveness. I want to end this fear and live comfortably. But when I think of the horrible scar on his temple and his insistence that I pay my debt, I vow again to avoid him forever.
I have never really told anyone this story. However, I've been meaning to get it out in some way for the whole world to know. I recall it being a cool summer afternoon in 1991. I don't remember the exact date when this all happened, but I remember what I would see on the streets where I lived. My family and I are a family of 5. Myself, my mom, my dad, my sister, and my baby brother. We've always been a friendly and generous family. My family is Mexican, and when we moved, we did not have much at the time. We moved into an apartment building that was right next to another apartment building in February of 1990. The apartment was not much, but we had to get by with what we had at the time. The first 2 or 3 months living in that cruddy apartment was alright. However, we did struggle at times in those few months. I was playing by myself outside this one day in May because I was bored of watching cartoons and wanted to actually get outside for once. I was around the backside of the apartment playing catch with a football with my uncle from my dad's side of the family. I remember it clearly because while we were playing, I couldn't help but notice the strong, horrendous smell of what seemed to be urine. My uncle seemed bothered too because he walked towards me asking if I needed to use the bathroom, but I replied with a simple no and that I was okay. When we were eating dinner that night, as we were eating, I glimpsed outside the window where you can see the outside of the other apartment. In a window of one apartment, I saw a brown-haired man who looked to be middle-aged and had his arms full of boxes and bags walking towards the dumpster. The man violently threw the stuff into the dumpster, and when he threw everything, I saw what looked like a blood-covered, severed hand fall out of a black bag. The man immediately picked up the severed hand, placed it in the dumpster, and speed-walked back to the front of the other apartment. I thought this occurrence was strange, but didn't even think to question whether that was a real hand or what he could have been carrying. I did see some other strange things happening with that man, but I don't want to get too deep into them. Perhaps some other time or in a different story I will. After that night, a very foul odor of what seemed like urine and roadkill would stink up our apartment for almost a year. It went on for so long, and this was one of the worst memories I have. I even suffered some trauma from it. One night, as I was trying to fall asleep, I started to hear heavy drilling, like a power drill being used. The sound was so disturbing and eerie that I get goosebumps even just thinking about it. I got up to look through the kitchen window to see who was drilling, but when I got to the living room, I saw my dad crouched by the window. I asked my dad what he was doing, and he came and quickly pulled me over and had me crouch beside him. He then told me something that made my entire body turn cold. There's a maniac living next to us. We sat there for about 10 minutes in the pitch dark of our living room, and although it was only 10 minutes, it felt like an eternity. The drilling finally stopped, and my dad and I both peeked through the window to check what was happening. We saw that same man comb his hair back and leave his place. I glanced through the window of his apartment and saw something that made me know there was something seriously wrong. There was a young boy passed out on a bed with the TV on in front of him. What bothered me the most was the fact that this boy was completely naked. No clothes at all. Not even underwear to cover himself. My dad told me to go back to my room so he could contact the police. I curled into a ball on my bed. Even with my eyes wide open, I could not think of anything else but the uncomfortable image of that unconscious naked teen on the bed. I ended up falling asleep after worrying for some time about what would happen next. A few months later, I was on my way back home with my grandma after staying with her. She was bringing me back to my apartment, and when we got there, we saw a swarm of police. An officer directed my grandma to park beside our apartment because they needed space for whatever they were doing. I was scared and holding onto my grandma tightly as she took us both to my place. She opened the door and my mom pulled us both into the room. I ran towards the living room window to see the swarm of police outside. I saw boxes and containers being dragged out from the apartment. And then I saw that same man being put into a police car, and I could swear I saw him look back at me. We moved out of our apartment complex a week later to stay with my uncle because my parents both agreed that we did not need the drama going on to ruin our lives. I am older now, and I later learned that the man who had been arrested was the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who was known to have taken the lives of 17 men. He would not only kill, but would drug, cannibalize, and do other monstrous things to his victims. It's hard to see the world the same way after that traumatic experience. But what I've learned is, you should not trust people too easily.
Hi, my name is Shay. Well, at least that's what everyone calls me. About 11 years ago, my mom, my big brother, and I moved from Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee. We were staying with my uncle and his wife and stepkids for a while until we got our own place. About a month later, we found an apartment to stay in. I had a bunch of teddy bears that I really liked between I was 12 going on 13. Well, when we finished to move our new house, I decorated my room really nice, and I set my teddy bears on my shelf above my bed. A week later, I noticed one of my teddy bears would always go missing, and I would find it under my brother's bed. I thought he was taking my teddy bear just to freak me out, but he really had no idea what I was talking about. It was kind of weird, so I decided to lock all my bears in my closet. They stayed in my closet for 2 days. Everything was fine. That's what I thought until the third day after has been started. The third day, I woke up on a Saturday and my closet door was cracked and my teddy bear was in the same place under my brother's bed. I knew something was wrong. After that, I immediately threw my teddy bears away after that. We stayed in that apartment for a year. After that, we moved. I'll never forget the day of the move. We found bones in the fireplace from a human. Now I'm 23, and I still remember that day, but I always think, what if I set up a video camera to see what was causing my teddy bears to do what they did?
When I was young, I was fascinated by the devil. It's embarrassing to think about it now, but at the time it seemed cool, and I admired these self-proclaimed devil worshippers and wanted to be like them. So, I logged into a devil worship community on the internet every day and wrote posts and comments. Then one day, while I was sleeping, I started coughing and felt like hot smoke was filling the room. When I opened my eyes in surprise, something was burning in front of me. It was a being. He was so tall that his head reached the ceiling. His body had many horns, and his mouth was so big that he could swallow me. The heat was so intense that my vision was blurred and I couldn't see clearly. He wrapped his huge hands around my body. His hands were so hot that I could vividly feel the pain of every cell in my body burning. It wasn't a dream. He said to me with a smile,
"I came here because you wanted to see me."
I screamed, and he stroked my head. Every time his hand touched my head, it burned and smoke appeared, and it felt like my brain was melting from the extremely high temperatures. He said,
"We welcome you. Be a part of evil. Then you will realize that darkness is more beautiful than light."
He opened his arms and hugged me. Then a great happiness surged within me, and the desire to worship evil arose in my heart, and I felt terrible pain and pleasure burning through my whole body at the same time. Then I opened my eyes. When I woke up, it was 5 a.m. My entire body had turned red, and it was hot as if lava was flowing inside my body. I ran to the church, even though I didn't usually go to church. When the pastor listened to me, he spoke quietly.
"It seems like the devil wants you."
He prayed for me. Although my mind seemed to calm down, I still could not escape the clutches of evil. That night, when I opened the door of my bedroom, there was a different place there. It was an endless red world covered in lava. The air was so hot and toxic that it was difficult for me to breathe. I heard the screams of countless people, and huge demons were running towards me with huge maces. They started swinging their maces at me, and I fought back, but when I hit them, they actually enjoyed it. In front of them, I felt like a little puppy. At that time, I remembered the prayer the pastor had taught me, and I started reciting it. As I said the words, cracks appeared in the demons' bodies, and light leaked through them. They screamed in agony. Their screams were as loud as 100 lions roaring at the same time. As I continued to recite the prayer, the monsters' bodies crumbled and turned into black ash. After some time, I woke up. I posted about my experience in the devil worship community, and people were amazed that I had actually met demons. People left comments saying they too wanted to meet the devil and asked me to tell them how. I was so appalled that I immediately left the community. From that day on, I hung a large cross in my house and recited a prayer every day before going to bed. I no longer read, listened to, or looked at anything related to the devil. From that day on, the demons no longer appeared in front of me. But even now, sometimes hot smoke and ash blow in my room. Whenever that happens, I recite a prayer and the smoke gradually disappears. However, I can still smell them now. That creepy, strong smell of burnt smoke and toxic gases. I know they are around me even now, and I'm afraid they'll follow me forever.
My name is Dan. This happened 3 years ago. I moved out of my parents' house once I started making a steady paycheck. I'm a plumber, and one day I had to go to someone's house to fix some pipes. There was a married couple and their daughter living there. Their daughter was 22 at the time. She was 6 months older than me, and her name was Amanda. While I was working, she was talking to me, asking if I was single and stuff like that. And to be honest, she seemed pretty cute. We exchanged phone numbers and eventually started dating, and she even moved into my house. We were 3 months into our relationship, and stuff started to get out of hand. She was always getting mad and annoyed so easily. She always started arguments, and so on. This began to happen all of the time, even in public, which was incredibly embarrassing. One day I had enough, and I had to break up with her, and I told her to leave and never come back. Amanda was pretty pissed off when I said that. I just ignored her when she was packing her stuff. She finally left, or so I thought. After that day, she would always show up at my house, harass me, throw rocks at my window, and so on. I'd called the cops many times, but she was gone by the time they showed up. About a month later, when I came home from working, I would find her in her house, yelling at me to come back, or I'd find writing on my walls that would say, "Come back, or I'll kill you." The writing eventually went from pencil to marker, and then her own fucking blood. And yes, I'm being serious when I said blood. That bitch carved my name a bunch of times into her arms and legs. She only got into my house because I forgot to take the house key back from her at the time. In hindsight, I'm such an idiot, I know. That psycho knew where my parents lived and showed up to their house during the night. My mom almost had a heart attack when she woke up to the sound of a knife being tapped on the window glass. When she woke up, she saw Amanda standing there, staring at her while psychotically smiling at her. Amanda did a lot, which really pissed me off, so one night I decided to stay overnight at my parents' house. It was about 2 in the morning when I heard a tapping noise in the window next to me. I turned and saw Amanda staring right at me. Her eyes were wide open and red. She had bags under her eyes and a huge smile. I went outside and started yelling at her to stay away from me and my family, but she screamed at the top of her lungs and charged at me with a knife. I punched her right in the face, which knocked her out. I called the cops and made sure Amanda didn't wake up while they were arriving. The cops came quickly while Amanda was knocked out. They found my house key on her, and she was arrested and eventually sentenced for a long while. After Amanda was sentenced, my parents and I moved out of state because we'd like to stay as far away from Amanda as we possibly can, because she will eventually be released.